Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephen Russell, President and CEO of the San Diego Housing Federation, and I may look a little bit tired in my eyes, but I am excited in my heart. This has been a great 2.5 days so far. This is the last session of our conference, and we've got quite a few treats in store for you, including an amazing dance performance we're going to do before we get to our regular panel. It's been an incredible week together, remembering, reimagining, and re-engaging. These days have just flown by, and I have to say I've been able to listen in on most of our programs and been really moved by a lot of the recurring themes that I've heard. And there's been a lot of threads that have flowed through these days. You know, kicking off with Mark Dones and their observations of how the structures of power really need to change and what can we do to actually change them is a theme that has flowed through the rest of the conference. As we talk about basic resources like transit, and availability and access to power in a literal sense, access to the economy through things like transit. We've talked about the Youth Opportunity Pass that will allow kids to be able to access all that the city has to offer, and then questions asked as to whether we could not provide the same to our unhoused neighbors, to make it possible for them to make it easier to engage in life, to go to work, to do the things that they need to do. We had an amazing presentation. I hope you were able to see the plenary at the lunchtime today. That was, I believe it was today. Seriously, I'm getting goofy, and I've told the tech guy he can hit the mute button on me anytime if I really go off the rails. But Assemblymember Dr. Keela Weber was really an introduction to our group. We haven't spent. She's a new assembly member. We got to know each other and she was just amazing. Someone who we spend so much time educating our electeds, we feel like, to understand the scope of these issues. And she is someone who comes into this office with an amazing breadth and depth of understanding and really, really underscored the ties between health and housing. So all of these things are themes that we have talked about before, seems to have come together in this conference more than ever before. And so I'm really pleased that you're all able to be here to join us. But and I will say that the other theme that comes up, affirmatively furthering fair housing, which, to extend that, furthering participation by all in our organizations and political structures. So we're looking to be more inclusive, to more than just not be discriminatory, but to affirmatively further the participation of more individuals. So before we move into our closing panel, which is entitled "A Look at the Past, Present, and Future of Affordable Housing," I'd like to introduce the Mariah Performing Arts Team. They are live with us on the rooftop of Atmosphere. Let's watch. Thank you, Mariah, for forming arts. That is really beautiful. It brings to mind thoughts of leaving, of longing, of working together. I'm not sure what you all read into it, but I find these moments in this conference have been of meditation and dance very centering, an opportunity for us to pause, get the chatter quiet, and to just appreciate the beauty of this world. And so thank you to Mariah Performing Arts for that. So we are moving into our closing plenary session. It's a panel with three speakers who represent very different perspectives on the past, present, and future of housing in our region. Our three guests, in the order that we're going to hear from them, first will be Arnulfo Manriquez, the President and CEO of MAAC, followed by County Supervisor Terra, Lawson, Remer, and finally Dike Anyiwo, an active member of the MB Dems and Vice Chair of the Midway Planning Group. With that, let me invite onto the stage Arnulfo Manriquez, President and CEO of MAAC, and I have one prompting question, then we'll see where the conversation goes. And really, Arnulfo, how did you get into affordable housing? Can you start to tell us where you began?
Yes, no. Well, I'm here representing the past, but I actually feel like president the future still as well. But I got involved in affordable housing while I was a student at UCSD in the Urban Studies and Planning program. And I was going through my education, I was going through my classes. I had done an internship with an architecture firm, C.W. Kim Architects. They designed the Emerald Shapery, and I was in their office doing their internship out there. But I kept feeling it's not what I wanted to do, and I wanted to find what my purpose was, or the reason why, the career I wanted to get into. And lo and behold, a speaker comes to one of my classes. Her name is Heather Elton Ballard. She was the assistant director of North County Housing Foundation, now known as Community Housing Works. And she talks about farm worker housing, and she talks about helping families, how to keep families in one place and keeping children in one school district instead of moving around with the farm where the farm labor was. And then she talked about that work being a career, that work being an opportunity to work with architects and with contractors and with banks and with cities and with planning, and to develop something that was going to be of huge impact to families that were farm worker families. And as I was sitting there, I thought, that's what I want to do. Like that is what I want to do. I went and I spoke with her. I talked with her. I connected with her, and I asked for a job. Literally, I said, I want to work here. She said, well, we don't have any jobs, but you can volunteer and you can learn. And I said, I'll come in and I will learn. And so that was around March of 1993. Just about a little over 28 years ago. That is how I got connected. But let me just introduce myself really quick here. My name is Arnulfo Manriquez. I am an immigrant. I was not born in the United States. I was born in Mexicali. I came to the United States when I was 10 years old. I went to a lot of different schools, not because I got kicked out, but just the natural process of moving from one country to another, to one school, to another place. And I am now the CEO of MAAC, and I have a whole story about how I got here and my trajectory to get here. But my interaction was really listening to somebody speak about affordable housing. But they were talking about families, not necessarily like mine, because my family was not a farm worker family, but families that resonated with me. Like I knew families like that. I understood that. I met friends, I had neighbors, like people that had gone through that. So it was something that resonated with me, that connected me. And 28 years later, this is what I'm doing. And we are still working to improve and look at ways how we can have a better impact.
Well, so you're talking about the past there, and I guess, how do you see that? I mean, has it changed a lot? I mean, you look around, we get together with the CEOs of San Diego housing, and what do you see when you look around the table?
Well, it's interesting. Back in when I joined this work, I almost got like an opportunity about what is your title or your position. I just said, I'll be a project manager because I think I'm doing what others are doing. But there were not many project managers. We were under construction on one of the first tax credit projects in the country. Nonetheless, in San Diego, definitely. And so it was one of the things for me, like straight out of college, immigrant, looking to find a career, and salaries were definitely much lower. But for me, I thought it was a great salary to be able to go into. But as I was going in there, one of the things that resonated with me, it's like we had this project and the media wanted to come, and it was Univision coming, right? Univision, they can only do interviews in Spanish. And out of the whole board of directors, out of our organization, like I was the only one, like 6 months out of college, the one that could come and do an interview in Spanish. And it's not surprising that it is surprising that when those interviews come along, I'm still the one that's out there. There's a couple other people out there now, and it's good, and we need more and more. But a lot has changed, from being in that first tax credit project. So those projects had likely have already gone through resyndication projects, resyndication. But the cost, the industry, the process, the services. I have a whole story about the trajectory. We started out just building housing, but then understood that we needed to do much more. Like we needed to do much more than just create the space and the affordability. It needed to be more than housing. So.
Well, so are you saying we're not in the real estate development business?
We are not. This, it started out as production of units. Okay, we have this opportunity to create an affordable place for people to live. And what we saw as people were moving into the apartments, we actually didn't have a property management company yet when people moved in. And so one morning I got a phone call in my house, my personal phone number in my house, and it was a family saying, hey, the gate broke and we can't get in and out of the apartment complex. I'm like, I don't know how to fix that. That's like, but we didn't have a property management company in place. But once I started talking to the families more and more, they had an affordable place to live. They were no longer living in overcrowded condition. They were living in a healthy, safe, sanitary, like clean, in a great environment. But it doesn't mean that people have access to education or opportunities, or that they know what those opportunities are out there. So we started realizing that, all right, we can't just leave it at this. We have to figure out ways to be able to engage those families, to be able to open doors for them. We can't do the work for them, right? The families, the people, when we talk about self-sufficiency, people step into those roles, and they have to want them. But if they don't know what's there, they're never going to get there, right? So our job was to begin to create those opportunities for people to start stepping into those roles. And I think there's a lot more work that we can do there, because I don't believe that it's all about unit production. I think it is about also developing our communities in such a way that people don't need affordable housing as much as we have it right now.
Well, so you see, that sounds like we're using the past as a lens to look at what the future might look like. What is the future of MAAC?
Well, in our future, we always talk, and we continue to do it. It's more than housing. It is, I was there at the grand opening of the Mercado apartments in Barrio Logan. I heard the speakers. I heard Roger Cáceres. I heard Rich Juarez, and I connected with them, and I really, what they said resonated with me. We do more than housing. And so I have seen families that have been living in affordable housing for 15, 20 years. And I don't think that's necessarily a good thing. But there are those households that are on fixed incomes that they cannot find any other type of labor or work or employment. Like it is, there are some fixed incomes that I understand, and we all understand that. But nobody wants to continue living in affordable housing for the rest of their lives. It's beautiful and it's great, and you can save money. But I think that people, all of us, we want to contribute what we can into our own, into ourselves, and we want to invest into ourselves. but we don't know what those opportunities are. You know, we're only gonna like strive and struggle and go through it and figure it out. But with organizations that look at this as more than housing and more than housing, more than unit production, we can actually be able to help people stabilize and engage and stay connected, but also open up the opportunities. Students that live in affordable housing will do much better than those that are living in overcrowded living conditions. Like automatically, like that is a given, right? And so how do we work with the parents? How do we work with those students to make sure that they are going to thrive and that those parents have the opportunity to complete their education or immigration status or an employment certification that is going to move them in such a way that they're going to be able to get out of poverty, or even such a way of being able to save and paint a picture for them that they can be homeowners and start building wealth and start being able to be off on their own, where they can start leaving a legacy for their families as well.
Oh, and I see those principles are embodied in COM 22. I mean, that was a project you did with Bridge some years back and with Habitat for Humanity. And so those kinds of partnerships, do you see those as a critical part of the future?
Absolutely. You know, those, when we started working on that development, we competed. So Bridge and MAAC were competitors, right? And it was about, you know, to a certain degree, you start thinking about ownership, right? Ownership of the community that you're working in, right? You know, so MAAC and Barrio Logan, MAAC and the Latino community, like it goes hand in hand. Like it is something that this is our area, right? But there is a need for affordable housing everywhere here in San Diego. And as we went through this process, you know, Bridge had some great ideas about their development, and they have a tremendous expertise on there. And we had some great networks and connections and support from the community as well. But when we sat down and worked together, we joined the ideas that we each had, and we came out with a development that's so impactful in the community. It goes from preschool, it goes from a dental clinic, a community dental clinic. It goes to senior housing, and we actually got had two funding for seniors there as well. Family affordable housing, but we were actually able to create home ownership, and it was something that at every single community meeting, and we must have had 25 community meetings, and Bridge was there, MAAC was there, and we were hearing, and the architects were there, and when we kept hearing home ownership, we kept saying it's leased land, we won't be able to do it. Like, get it out of your minds, it doesn't work. But because of that insistence and connection with the community pushing us to try to figure that out, we created home ownership. And so this development, we call it COM 22. It's where communities meet, and it's commercial and retail, and it's seniors and preschools, and it's rental and home ownership. It is Logan Heights and Sherman Heights. It's really something that was an impactful, but you know, even though Bridge and MAAC compete in certain areas, when we work together, we did such a great opportunity there to bring to reality like the spectrum of work. And it's what we need to continue to do. It doesn't start with just only affordable rentals. It needs to go beyond that and after rentals, right? People to be able to go out and purchase their home.
Well, and then you raise an important issue, and I've heard this theme come up several times over the last 3 days, is we know that some communities have said there's an overconcentration of affordable housing in the communities. And others say, well, it's a bulwark against gentrification. It provides other opportunities. Do you have and the system is in some ways rigged now toward putting family housing out into these high opportunity areas. How do you feel about all of that?
Well, 28 years of developing affordable housing. I think many of you have seen some of the affordable housing that was built back in '94 with the Mercado apartments, or other housing up in Escondido with Community Housing Works, North County Housing Foundation. When you look at affordable housing over the years, and people say there's a kind of concentration of poverty, what people don't see is that affordable housing is important regardless of where it is located, right? If it is located in Santa Luz, if it's located in La Jolla or Del Mar, right? You know, there are opportunities with school districts, right? You hear about that's a better school district and better school system, education system. Those are all very important. However, when you don't have a safe and an affordable place to live, all your money and concentration and focus is on just trying to keep that roof over the head of your family. So I understand the concentration of affordable housing units in certain areas, and I think we do need to change. It does need to change, but we also have a place where those are homes where the families live. Like that is people's homes. When somebody calls that place a poverty, place full of poverty, remember you're talking about people that have chosen to live there, and not just chosen, but also they've made their lives there. This is people's homes. And what I always tell people, when somebody moves into affordable housing, every year we do income certifications. We check the incomes of families. It's part of the requirements of our funding sources. And so you look at people's incomes, and we track this very closely at MAAC. We are the property management company as well. So we look at where people are, and year after year, consistently, most families, their income is improving, is going higher. And to the point where if they wanted to apply again, they would not qualify. That doesn't mean that they are out there, out in the market that they can go up buy a house. But it means is that they're going into that spectrum of the middle income, and they start looking at those opportunities of entry-level home ownership. But every year, regardless of where these affordable housing units are located, those families are thriving. But you have to make sure, we all have to make sure that we are playing a role to make sure that we're helping make that happen. It's not just build the units, provide some after-school programs, and everything's going to be fine. There is a lot more engagement that we all as developers and owners have to do to make sure that that progress and that year after year increase in income happens.
Well, so I'm going to ask you one more question about the past before we go to the supervisor. But I also am reminded by Laura Nunn, who always checks me. She's great at listening, and is that this is not a binary situation of urban, suburban equals high opportunity, low opportunity. There's not a simple binary equation there. There's an interleaving of communities, and there are high opportunities in some areas that are actually urban. But what you point out is that commonality is that you cannot simply provide the housing, that there's other supports. And so can I ask you this, so to go back to the past, MAAC started as a place-based, asset-based community development CDC, right?
Yes.
City Heights CDC is still there. Can you talk about what do we have from the past? What are those traditions that are still represented in our present?
Well, every housing development we are involved in any way whatsoever, we make sure that it's more than housing. And what I mean by that is we do income support. Like some families just need that access to like that assistance for food, for the basic necessities, right? Because people are struggling. But it then starts going beyond that. It starts going into, place-based is one thing, and the place has increased, right? With virtual, with travel, with transportation, we are an organization that provides services throughout the county of San Diego. But it is important that we continue that work with the families. Credit score. One of the things that we check when somebody moves into any rental, right? You look at your credit score to make sure that you're going to be able to pay. And that's one of the measures that we can use with families about how they are moving the needle. If they had bad credit or if they have no credit, no history, it is how do we begin to look at that? Because those are critical points that will be able to move a family forward. Economic development, did they finish their high school? Can we connect them to get our GED so that they can get access to more jobs, right? Are there certification training that we can go in and be a part of? Financial literacy. We always hear about this, but we dig in more than just here's a budget and you need to follow it, but we paint a picture of what they can see, right? That they can see and they can picture themselves. Many times financial literacy doesn't mean, oh, I see myself buying a house. Well, if you're looking at yourself at that point in time, you're not. But what we see in affordable housing in our developments is that it takes a couple of years for a family to just stabilize, just be in a safe place, in a stable zone. But what we see is year 6, 7, year 8, 9, that's where families are, I'm ready. Like, what do I need to do to buy a house? What do I need to do to get to these next levels? How can I save my money, or what programs are available to help me get there? those continue to be critical. I think sometimes we might be focused too much on the unit development and not really focused on recycling some of these affordable units, because people are moving out and buying homes, and being able to, that to me is a huge success if we're able to measure that. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Well, thank you, Arnulfo. I'm going to turn to our next guest here. And when we talk about the housing crisis, I mean, this is deep, it is wide. It affects, used to be, relatively limited to smaller communities, we felt. It didn't, the housing crisis didn't permeate throughout the region, and it certainly wasn't a part of the public consciousness. Now we're in a place where we're a graying society, baby boomers. I guess I'm the last year of baby boomers. You can tell we're graying. I'm the youngest one around. But we're seeing a lot of challenges coming up. We see folks, huge numbers of people paying far more than 50% of their incomes on rent. And we've not always had, I think, the responses here that we've needed from government. I think it's very exciting to us that in the midst of this housing crisis, though, we do have new leadership in the region. We have a county board that for the first time begins to actually look like the county that it is representing. And with that in mind, we have with us Supervisor Terra Lawson Remer, who's very much emblematic of that change in power. And Supervisor, if I may ask you to share some of your thoughts about what you envision are some of the routes forward in the midst of this very deep, very severe housing crisis. So.
Thank you so much, Stephen. So as I think as Stephen outlined, and as we're all well aware, we face an enormous housing crisis across our region. This group in particular has heard all the statistics before, but it's worth reminding ourselves because although the housing crisis is bad everywhere, the data shows our crisis is uniquely bad. We have the third highest rate of housing cost burden housing homes in the nation. A minimum wage worker would have to work 125 hours a week to afford the median 2-bedroom apartment in San Diego. And only 22% of San Diego households can afford to purchase a median price home. And this is compared to a national average of 50%. So we're doing bad. I think we all know we're doing bad, but we're doing bad. And housing is expensive for many reasons. One of them, of course, is we've failed to keep up with demand. We've had decades of job and population growth, but we're missing about 90,000 units of projected demand. And we need to produce an additional 90,000 by 2030 to keep up with population growth. To translate those numbers into something I think we can all take home, we should be building about 22,000 homes every year, but we're only on pace to build half that amount. And this is significantly worse for the lower and middle income portions of the income spectrum, where we're only building enough housing to meet 10% of the demand. So if you think we should be building 12,000 low and middle income units, we're building about 1,200 every single year. So it's pretty dire. That being said, it's not only a supply problem, it's also, frankly, an income inequality problem. We've seen costs of housing increasing 7 times faster than incomes and wages. So even if you're in a good job, you're not keeping up with the rising housing costs here in San Diego County. So we have a major problem of asset growth and wage stagnation, which is making housing into an acute crisis. Housing is a linchpin to, I think, everything that we care about in our community and in our region. It's a linchpin for climate and health and education and shared economic prosperity, environmental sustainability and homelessness, creating a lot of opportunity for the next generation. You name it, housing is a key factor to all of it. So my view is we cannot afford to nibble at the edge of this crisis. We have to take transformative action to engage on this challenge and tackle it head on. We all know it, but it's important when we look at the data to remind ourselves it's not an abstract policy debate. It's not just about numbers. It's a very personal reality. I know seniors who are having trouble aging in place. I know struggling workers who can't keep up with rents that climbed 15% this past year. I know young families that are completely despairing as the dream of home ownership is slipping or has slipped away. As a mother of a young child, I am constantly worrying about the kind of community and planet that our children will inherit from us. We're facing rising unaffordability, growing inequality, mounting climate challenges, extreme weather events. And just to put this in perspective, 2050 sometimes seems a long time away, but that's within the time frame of a 30-year mortgage. 2050 is within the time frame of a 30-year mortgage if you were looking to buy a property today. We're projected to see average temperatures in San Diego County increase by nearly 5 degrees. We're on track for a 7-fold increase in extreme heat events and a 20% increase in days with ideal conditions for wildfires. Sea level rises of 1 to 3 feet and substantial losses of most of our cherished beaches and coastlines. So unless we take bold action today on climate, which requires bold action on housing, we are in for a pretty significant set of challenges within our own lifetimes. I see it that basically we have 3 options. We can continue business as usual and watch housing prices continue to rise, causing displacement, pushing homeownership out of reach, forcing longer and longer commutes from Temecula and Riverside counties, and paving over our open spaces from here to Anza Borrego Desert. We can build the wrong housing in the wrong places by building mixed mansions and destroying the very things that make San Diego such a special place to live, fueling more deadly wildfires and digging ourselves deeper into climate catastrophe. Or we can do the smart thing and build the right housing in the right places to ensure that San Diego is and remains an equitable, affordable, and environmentally place to live for ourselves and for future generations. So that sounds good, but what does that mean? What does that look like? What does it mean to build right housing in the right places? My view is right housing has to reflect the core values that San Diegans hold. First, it needs to be equitable. It's not just 60% AMI rental housing. These are important projects, but I'm using the term equitable to cast a wider vision. It means mixed income, mixed use. It includes low income households and persons experiencing homelessness, but it also includes first-time ownership opportunities, middle-income families, people who have a good job, but that good job is not enough to buy a house in our incredibly overinflated housing market here in San Diego housing. It includes homeowners and young people, immigrants and teachers and nurses, and everything in between. Second, the right housing is environmentally friendly. I absolutely reject the notion that if you can only care about equity or care about the environment, as if somehow these are opposites. In reality, we cannot achieve our climate goals without building the right housing in the right places near where people live and work, so we can get commute times down, get people out of their cars, allow people the ability to take a short car ride or walk or bike to the grocery store, to school, to live in their communities. But we also cannot have a serious discussion about equity without considering the climate impacts we are already having, the climate justice impacts that we are already having and continue to have on vulnerable communities and low-income populations. Because to be very frank, the people who are going to be bearing the brunt of climate catastrophes are people who are in low-income communities who cannot pay their way out of the crisis. That's already happening worldwide. That's already happening in low-income island nations who are seeing their nations sink into the ocean. It's already happening across sub-Saharan Africa, where subsistence farmers and subsistence herders no longer can maintain themselves on land that's parched dry. The people who will be hurt first and be hurt worst by climate are our low-income communities of color, our vulnerable communities, and the communities that are already too often left out and left behind. So the right housing needs to be environmentally friendly. That means sustainable building design and sustainable materials, energy efficiency, distributed solar, rainwater harvesting, and it means building near jobs in transit and in areas that have low vehicle miles traveled. Third, the right housing is about community. It's not just about 4 walls and a roof. For the planners out there, think in your mind, close your eyes, and vision Jane Jacobs, not Robert Moses. We need thriving mixed-use communities that are age-friendly, have access to neighborhood infrastructure like childcare and health facilities, schools, and real options for biking, walking, transit, and understanding the embedded nature of our streetscape and the landscape that we call home. Finally, the right housing supports good jobs for working families. Our construction industry has a long track record of uplifting people from poverty by creating opportunity and general wealth through good jobs that pay living wages. We should continue that. So where do we go from here? I believe we have a unique opportunity right now. We have new political leadership rising across our region, including a new mayor and city council in San Diego and many visionary leaders across the greater San Diego County. In the San Diego County government, we have a new board and a new vision for our shared future. For far too long, our county has been quiet at the housing table, but that's changing. We're looking to be much more active partners in tackling San Diego's big problems, and housing is at the top of the list. We're already taking action. I brought forward a housing package in September that funded $20 million into the county's Innovative Housing Trust Fund and increased its flexibility so more projects can qualify. We're increasing hundreds and potentially thousands of new project-based vouchers that will gap fund housing projects that otherwise would not get built. And we're developing new programs to incentivize sustainable and green and equitable housing. But we're just getting started. We know that when you're dealing with big challenges like housing, you need a big movement to push for real change. So we need all kinds of voices in that movement. This means you. You are all the experts and the leaders in each of your fields and spaces. We need people with your deep expertise in development and design and finance and resident services. We also need to center community voices and BIPOC voices and LGBTQ voices and labor voices and environmental voices and the voices of young people who want to see a brighter future and the voices of older folks who have one more fight in them and the voices of people that no one ever bothered to ask at the table before. That's the movement we need, and that is the movement that we are building. So please reach out to me or my housing team led by Jeff Yoon, who's also on the Zoom, and let's start building this movement together. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Supervisor. I mean, this is not you would hear applause if we were in a room right now. I'm looking at the chats, and we're hearing a lot of. I think the comment that I think is most compelling is data plus reality equals informed policy making. Great to see this approach on the Board of Supervisors. I don't know if I have ever heard such words from especially the North County Board Supervisor. If I could ask a couple questions before we go on to Dike. We've talked before about vouchers, and one of the ideas that was floated in one of our panels this week, my head is full of these things right now, of course, is the idea that maybe we need housing as an entitlement. So the vouchers, like the way you might receive Medicare, if you're eligible, you get them. The strongest counter arguments was Mark Stivers, and I believe this myself, is that if you flood the market with cash like that, then landlords will just be able to charge more. Project basing those vouchers, or maybe doing guaranteed basic income or guaranteed basic rent, putting cash in people's hands rather than directly to landlords. These are all discussions that are going on right now. Have you thought through, especially with regards to vouchers? I know you've made some proposals about what we might do locally, at least.
Well, I think you need both supply side and demand side answers, right? So we need to build more housing, and we need to make sure that that housing is accessible to people who currently cannot afford it. So we have to be looking at both. If we had a fixed market for housing and all of a sudden, you flood the market with money to buy housing, yeah, you would see an increase in the cost. So certainly we have to be looking at the supply side constraints and the supply side challenges for sure. But that's not enough, because if all we're doing is building more housing, but people still can't afford it, and people who are in the, we're not going to drive down the cost of housing by hundreds of thousands of dollars. We might stabilize it. We might reduce it to some extent, but wages have not kept pace with housing costs. So I do think it's important to look at those demand side approaches as well in terms of first-time homebuyer programs that you could give people an opportunity to get their toes into the homeownership market.
Well, I know from I haven't seen the latest stats, but right before the pandemic, the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation did a quick analysis that showed that the 10 fastest growing occupations in the region, of those, only 3 could actually afford to rent here. And that was kind of shocking. So it suggests that we aren't dealing with a legacy problem. We're continuing to create it with low wage jobs. And so to hear you talk about the wage issue is important. It's important to hear that. Any other thoughts before we talk to Dike? I know we've got a limited time. You've got a meeting you've got to go to at 4, I believe. So maybe if do you have any other thoughts you'd like to add before I introduce Dike?
I guess I want to just kind of give a call to action. So everyone's obviously on this meeting today because you care passionately about housing. So what's next, right? I think we're going to have a lot to gain in working together rather than apart. And that, like I said, it's housing builders, and it's the labor movement, it's community, it's our voices at the community table, but it's also environmentalists and college students and educators. So I think we need to all do the work to find our common shared interests among constituencies that for a long time we thought about our interests, or groups thought about their interests as being at odds. And we need to do the work to find that Venn diagram of, where do we need to build, what kind of housing we need to build to create a greener, more sustainable family future for our children. And that's also equitable and creates shared economic opportunity. And I think that those opportunities and possibilities are there, but it requires us to do a lot of work, because everyone comes to this space with their pre-existing biases and priorities, and looking for that Venn diagram where there's overlap in shared values and interest is work. And I think it's the work we need to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. And thank you for that call to action. I think that, this conference is a time where obviously like-minded people get together. We haven't always found the support from all these other parties. And so to have leadership, to help pull these groups together is critical, because we stand ready to do what we need to do. I will just say the leadership is appreciated. And talking about building these alliances, I'm going to go ahead and maybe turn to Dike, who is an active member of the YIMBY Dems, which YIMBYs and Dems used to not be. We used to think of pro-growth, pro-housing as being a market or more conservative value, but a whole generation of folks are feeling that they are being locked out of this market, young professionals, folks who followed the rules of society and were through fortune and hard work, still can't find themselves a home here in San Diego. And so with that, let me introduce Dike Anyiwo, who's an active member of YIMBY Dems and vice chair of the Midway Planning Group. So Dike, tell me your present, our future. How do you feel?
I feel good. I think the short answer is good, but thank you first and foremost, Stephen, for having me, and the Federation for inviting and putting on this conference. It's been a wonderful last few days of all of us sort of spending time, in some ways bouncing ideas off each other, learning new things, but also just reinforcing what I think we already really knew, right? I love that call to action that just came there from the supervisor. How do we really all take action, right? How do we step forward? How do we get engaged? And it was interesting to hear from Arnulfo sort of the industry side, if you will, and also, the sort of regulatory legislative side of things. But, for me, I come to this just as a normal person. I think in a lot of ways, my story is just the same as most folks. I kind of grew up, I went to college, I got a job. I'm one of those millennials. So they told me to find a job in a field that you're passionate about, which I did when I first came to San Diego. straight out of college, when I first moved here, I'd been to San Diego a few times, but I didn't know the city very well. And so initially, I actually had a friend from school whose family is from here, and I was able to rent a room initially, and it was actually her old childhood room in their house that I thought, for a month or two, maybe 3-4 months until I get my bearings, I just stay here and then continue to proceed. But those 2 months that I sort of budgeted for turned into 2 years because I budgeted inappropriately for realistically what we're here to talk about, right? The cost of living in San Diego is in a lot of ways extortionate, particularly for young people who maybe don't have a trust fund or a nest egg or any sort of savings of note. I think I was very fortunate in that I was able to find very affordable living with my friend's family and their 5 chihuahuas for 5 years there, or for 2 or 3 years there. But ultimately, I stayed there for, I want to say from 2012 to 2014. And in 2014 is when I moved to, where I still am here now in the Midway district. I found a townhouse that I had a friend who was already living here. A roommate moved out and I was able to slide in, for more than what I was paying at my friend's house, but ultimately, something that was within my range. And it was interesting, I'm sort of in preparing for this, I started thinking back to how we got here. And frankly, I had a furnished room at that first place that I lived. And when I moved here, it was literally just me in an empty room and an air mattress for a period of time because I couldn't afford a bed or a desk or a lamp and all these things that I now have, 5, 6 years, 7 years later. And that was largely a function of, like I said, it's frustrating having been, one of those people who did, to your point, follow the rules, who went to school, who got a job and did all these things, but still couldn't find the kind of quality of living that I was here looking for. And I moved here in 2014, and it was clear to me that the Midway district was, sort of past its prime, right? It had seen better days there. My hope at the time was, hey, this looks like an area that's ripe for, for a refresh. At that time, I don't think I really understood what drove the various systems that put us where we were. But, it was interesting where the cost of housing had always impacted my wallet, but it didn't really impact my life until I came to recognize that. And so after living here for a few years, there was a point in time where, I had a partner who wound up moving in with me because together, neither of us could afford, even together, neither of us could go and afford a quality 1-bedroom anywhere, or 2-bedroom anywhere. And at a certain point, that partner moved out and I found that I had a lot of spare time, right? I had a lot of time on my hands and I had a lot of frustration because I think one of the things that put some strain on that relationship was, frankly, where to live and how to live, right? And what quality of life did we want to have together? And so that was in, fast forward to 2018. And at that time, I'd been on Twitter for some time and, I was starting to seek solutions. And I was very fortunate, I think, that I found the Young Democrats of San Diego County very early. I think I missed their first meeting, but I've been to every meeting since then. Initially just reaching out and trying to find answers, trying to find solutions. There's so many challenges that we've talked about over the course of these last few days with financing and housing, with zoning, with community character and all these different components that factor into what we have. But through the YIMBY Dems, through the Housing Federation, Voice of San Diego, Circulate San Diego, Climate Action Campaign, there's a lot of different organizations that are proactive and solution oriented, in my opinion. And I just really tried to immerse myself with those different folks. And through those experiences, I was made aware of the existence of something called a community planning group, which for the average citizen, even my roommates now, they barely know what that is. But community planning groups, for those of you who don't know, they're voluntary groups, but they are officially recognized by the city of San Diego. And all you need to do to qualify, you don't need a planning background, you don't need any sort of technical knowledge. You just need to either be a property owner, a business person, or a resident of any given community. And so I took an interest, obviously, in my group here in Midway. I wound up starting to tune into some of those meetings right around the time that they were completing their community plan update, right, which is the kind of guiding document that governs the zoning for an entire neighborhood. And in 2018, I was able to slide in. I was able to fill a vacancy shortly after they completed their community plan update in I want to say September. And over the course of the last 2-3 years, what I've come to find out is, all of those circumstances, that situation that I found on the ground when I first moved here in 2014, there was a reason that Midway is what it is, right? Because historically, it had always been zoned as commercial, industrial, heavy industrial, really. We're proximate to the Marine Corps Recruit Depot and the Old Naval Training Center. And so we're famous for our strip clubs and adult entertainment sites because, that's what the industry and the market bore out over those times. In 1972, I didn't know this at the time, but I'm familiar with it now. In 1972, the citizens of San Diego instituted a coastal height limit, right, whereby everything north of downtown and west of the 5 freeway was subject to a moratorium of building taller than 30 feet. I know a lot of industry professionals here who understand even better than I do just how untenable it is to try to construct housing with those types of constraints. And so through the work that we did at the planning group, like I said, I joined just after the community plan was updated, and we were able to rezone this community from that industrial commercial configuration to one that is much more residentially focused and oriented. I think the update itself allowed for almost 11,000 new units across just this small little community. But there was still that 30-foot height limit, that constraint. And so through the work that we do with our city council and the various different legislators across this region whose jurisdiction consists of this Midway district, myself and our chair, we came to a point where we realized that the city was actually looking at changing that height limit for the sports arena site, which is just 2 blocks away from where I'm sitting now. And it was interesting because, like I said, when I first moved here, I didn't know anything about anything as it pertains to zoning or housing or construction, but, I'm a quick study. And I came to realize that, hey, if the city upzones or raises the height limit for just that sports arena site, that city-owned property, that's great for the city, but what does that do for the rest of the community, right? How does that impact the rest of us? The supervisor mentioned the types of housing and where to build housing, and Midway is just perfectly placed, right? It's just north of downtown. It's just across from the beaches. We're a 10-minute drive from just about everything, right? And honestly, walking around, biking around, we can get to most places. I bike to my office downtown, easily, very easily. And so we recognized that it was ultimately going to be insufficient for the community if the city was to only upzone that one little 50-acre parcel. And we pushed back strong on our city council member and the members of the city council. We were able to sort of expand that vision and expand that focus to the entire Midway Pacific Highway community planning area. And so as a function of that, we became involved in what we now know as Measure E, but basically this past electoral cycle, we were able to serve both myself and Kathy, who's our chair, as the principal officers and ultimately the spokespeople for an effort to sort of relieve the Midway district from that constraint. And we were wildly successful. Frankly, I think we came out with over 80,000 votes ahead of the no position, right? And so it's been wonderful to reflect and to kind of pan out, but realistically, since November, since that election, all of our focus as a community and as community planning group has been on what comes next, right? How do we then realize that vision, that vision that's been articulated in our community plan, but still has yet to be realized, frankly. And so, I think Stephen, you and a lot of the folks who are involved here, they're well aware of the fact that the sports arena in and of itself, that whole process that was initiated last year had to be restarted. And that's frustrating, frankly. It took 11 years for the community plan update to be approved. And I got real lucky that I showed up right at the tail end of that. 11 years before then, I was probably in my teens still. At this point, I'm in my early 30s. And fortunate that I dodged that, but realistically, it's been almost a full year. It's been 3 years since a community plan update was approved, and it's almost been a full year since we were victorious at the polls. And we still have yet to see groundbreaking or permits pulled for a lot of these types of housing. So there's a certain level of recognition of that I think is imperative for people to have as far as how long things take and what it really takes to get anything done. But ultimately, I think that as I reflect and as I look to continue staying engaged, really being involved at a local level, being involved with your community, there's power there, right? And I would encourage everyone to lean into that because, to one degree or another, we've been successful here. We're not yet done by any stretch, but we have been very successful here, and we're proud of the work that we're doing, continuing to do.
No, with good reason. And, I think that the sports arena is a particular case in point, I think is really important. I take pride in the fact that, can I say that Laura Nunn gigged HCD into rejecting Kevin Faulkner's deal, bad deal. There may have been some other forces at play, but we take a fair share of credit for creating this opportunity. right? I mean, here's huge public land, and the true public benefit was not being pursued because of political considerations. And I'm going to ask a question both of Dike and Arnulfo, because I know you're both close to this issue in different ways. But there seems to be an attitude sometimes that things can only be either or in San Diego, that we can have a soccer stadium or we can have housing. But Laura X, I'll leave her anonymous, as someone who is a big fan of both, what do you think we can do to change that mindset? So I'm going to ask Dike that question first, and then Arnulfo, maybe you want to talk about this either or.
Yeah, I would say that clearly no, right? There is no such thing as this either or. I think I joke sometimes, and I like to say that I'm greedy, right? I want it all. I want to understand, I want to participate, I want to lead, I want to support, I want for our community to have all of the amenities that it requires. And that will make sense, not just the Midway district, but San Diego at large, a really strong and sustainable region. And so frankly, I want to say I strongly reject that notion that we can only do one thing at a time. I think historically, San Diego has been led by people who maybe have a narrow lane of focus. And frankly, I feel as though myself and a number of the folks who I associate with are on the cusp of, if not a new generation, it's certainly a new philosophy, right? A new way of thinking and a new reality that not only do we not have the luxury of only focusing on one thing at a time, we actually have a lot more capacity than we realize. And by being strategic and sort of deliberate and intentional, we can achieve quite a bit of things by, aggregating and finding that synergy.
So Arnulfo, this either or question, I mean, are we capable of doing big things in this region?
Absolutely. That's the only way that I see us being able to have the impacts that we need to have. Thinking big, when you look at what prevented these higher density developments 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was a fear of creating too much affordable housing, or fear of like living in neighborhoods that were not safe back then. And thinking, no, this is too much. Like, we have to worry about parking. We have to worry about these situations. If you look at Mercado apartments, which were built 27 years ago, right? That's, if we were to build at current densities, we could probably build it 3-4 times as many units in these locations. We're right next to the trolley. It is a high cost area now. Back then, nobody wanted to live there, but now it's a very desirable place. It's so central, so the location of it. But think about 144 units versus a 600 unit development, mixed income with a whole bunch of variety of opportunities of commercial and development and work, right? Creating work environments. We do have to think bigger. And so when we look at either or of soccer, like we are at the point in time where we've already committed to the transportation. We've already committed to public transportation. We've already committed to this high density. We've already committed to building these higher density projects near transit. And that means that we are going to have some resistance from areas saying this is too much. We need our parking, and I get it, right? Because I get in my own situation. So when I get home a little bit too late, I do have to find parking on the street because my daughter parks in the garage. And so when we have those are important, but you think big, we have a greater impact in economies of scale and use and abilities to bring in market rate and affordable. Like those, I think, are the best opportunities to do that. And when you think big, that's what you get. When we start looking at piecemeal, you're going to get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but you do have to think about it as a whole. And we all have a role to play. Just the way that Supervisor Lawson spoke and the way that Dike spoke about like their involvement and where people need to get involved and engage. Like we have opportunities for people to get engaged at all spectrum of affordable housing and middle income and other opportunities.
Yep. Well, I think what you just said there is to reiterate what the supervisor said, is that we do need everyone at the table. And what I think we've been lacking is a political power that has been committed to bringing everyone to the table. We look at the former Board of Supervisors. We look at the last how many mayors that were really fairly narrowly had a fairly narrow base, narrow but strong base. And, I think a network of variety of strands is going to be stronger. I do want to comment, Dike, you're talking about you got to stay with it. You got to stay with it a long time. I will tell you that in some ways I think of planning as a young man's game or a young person's game because it does take so long, but that's not true. Once you get older, you start to realize, we're planning for a world that I know I'm planning for things I may never see. I'm not that old and I'm not going anywhere soon, but the arc of these things can take so long. I remember drawing a line down our SR15 freeway, which was still a plan for a freeway, and saying there's got to be transit there. And the community got together around, let's insist. Angeles Lira, a great planner early in this, from some years back here at the city, I asked her, how do we get a trolley down El Cajon Boulevard? How do we get a trolley on the I-15? She says, first you draw a line, and then you insist upon it year after year. And it's true. There's nothing more. So now we have the 215 and the 235. And to see new ages of advocates, we see, Randy Van Vleck, who was a kid learning at the center line, is now mentoring people, right? I mean, it is a generational, intergenerational thing. So I think that's very important. Some last thoughts here. I mean, we're at the end of a very long day for a lot of folks that have been on here. As we're talking about past, present, future, we're talking about different sectors, and we had government, we had the community nonprofits, we had a community member, someone who works in the business community. Can we think big about what a coalition looks like that can make these things happen? Because I know we've got a big tax measure coming up in 2022. We've got to come back. Measure A was effectively squashed by the establishment. And we've got to come back with that some year if we're going to do this. What other elements have we not talked about that this coalition that we need for this coalition? Is that a question you think you can answer? Arnulfo, you're starting to nod.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been doing it, right? It's not just housing advocates that are affordable housing advocates that need to be able to move this. It does take every industry that is connected to life. Really, it's employers, it's free schools, it is housing, it's transportation, it's education, it's health, right? The environment, the health of people. And, we all know what change can happen when you have people at the table making decisions. And I'm referring to the city council in the last couple of years, how the council members have been shifting who they represent, who they look like. The county board of supervisors, like who they represent, and the voices that are making it to the conversations at the table. And when in my role as CEO of MAAC, right, we are a large nonprofit, and we're recognized as a Latino organization, but we provide services through the entire community, like at every level, but primarily helping the low-income households, right? When I look around at organizations like ours, like other affordable housing developers, whether they're for-profit, whether they're nonprofit, right? And I look around at their leadership, and I look around at their leadership staff, and like they're not necessarily people that look like me. And I make comment to that because it does take a village, but we also want to make sure that the people at the table represent the people that we are serving. So the people that are living in our housing, the people that are coming through our programs. We are overrepresented. When I say we, as in Latinos, we are overrepresented in the low-income spectrum. Today is Latina Equal Pay Day, right? The county supervisor had a big event today in the county, and it demonstrates how much lower Latinas are paid compared to a male, a white male, right? And when we build our industry, at every aspect, whether we're engineers or contractors or developers, we need to make sure that we are bringing people to the table that represent the populations that we are serving. And so the coalition not only needs to be diverse in the different topics of areas of expertise, but also the representation, because we do see, while even one seat at the county supervisor with Nora Vargas, like the big impacts that can be made. When 40% of the population here in the county is Latino, like we can make a big impact.
Amen. And I'll jump on that as well, because I think one of my big takeaways from my reflection and just my experience has been, and anyone can do this, right? You don't need to have a specific trained, academic background or skill set in anything in particular, right? Whatever you're good at, right? Whether that's graphic design, communication, storytelling, there is a place for you in this movement and underneath this tent. I think it's important, maybe even imperative, to be curious, to be engaged. I feel personally as though I've found a lot of success in acting locally, starting with your smallest concentric circle of your own identity and then expanding out and ultimately, having that kind of impact that Arnulfo was talking about. Together we can all achieve more. But there really isn't anything or anyone that this coalition doesn't include, right? Everyone needs to live somewhere. And so to that degree, and with that sort of framing, you recognize that this coalition belongs to all of us, and it is for all of us, and it consists of all of us. We just need to do, I think, a never-ending job of continuing to bring folks along. You mentioned Randy, a good friend, and I appreciate what he does so much. I've found a lot of mentorship, right? Whether it's from Arnulfo, from Stephen, from Randy. There are people out there who are doing things, and so to try to not just do what you're doing today, but do it with the end in mind and bring folks along and bring young people along, help inspire that next generation. This last year and a half in particular, I've even before this last year and a half, I've always said that if I'm the youngest or the darkest person in the room, I'm doing something right. And I subscribe to that. I really do, because for whatever reason, here we are. And I'm encouraged. I feel very bullish about the future. Maybe I'm just too new at this and I hadn't been worn down yet, but I feel strong. I feel that the best is yet to come.
Yep. No, I appreciate what you're saying there, and I'm probably the oldest, the whitest, and the queerest in this conversation right now, so I'll own that. And it's important. It does make a difference. Representation matters. We've learned that. Before we go, as we wrap up here, I'm going to ask each of you, starting with Arnulfo, any call to action? We've got an audience today of our advocates here of the housing family. Do you have anything you'd like to share as a call to action?
Absolutely, I do. And before that, though, Dike, I know the feeling, right, of like being the youngest in the room, like the only person of color in the room. Like that, I have been living that, and here I am representing the past, right? 28 years after I started working in affordable housing, right? I still have a ways to go. I have a lot of energy and a lot that I think that we need to accomplish. But a call to action is really pay attention to your and I think we're talking to developers. We're talking to industry leaders, businesses, and on the panel, I think there may be residents as well. There is a role for all of us to play. Like each of us can do something, right? Whether it is going out or visiting an elected official, whether it is when we go out and look at who we are hiring, who we are training, where we are doing our outreach to make sure that the people that are going to be doing the work represent who we are serving. And it is, there's a saying that I've learned on when I sit on boards. And so I recommend, one, get yourself on boards. Like if you're interested in changing that, get yourself on board of directors of organizations. And whenever there is any transition of board leadership, like or executive directors or CEOs, be a part of that search committee. People hire people like themselves, right? And if we're not at the table, we want to make sure that we are represented. So when you go out and hire, when you go out and recruit, when you go out and speak about the careers in affordable housing and what it can do, because these are big careers. They're impactful and you can make a great living doing whether you're the for-profit or nonprofit. Go out to make sure you engage, but make sure that who you're engaging to do that is they're able to resonate with the people that we're trying to bring. And it is people like ourselves, and I'm speaking as a Latino, right? Is just really pay attention to it. There's a lot of talent that is out there. There's a lot of local talent that is there, and just opening that door and that opportunity and the training, like people will learn numbers. People will learn numbers. But the passion and the connection and the understanding of our culture and our and our community, that is priceless, and that's where we will have the greatest impact.
Well, I
And
appreciate also, I don't know if I can say before I ask you the same question, Dike, about the call, is I saw what you did with the board of Housing California as president, that you spearheaded a series of changes that made the board broader, more reflective of the state, more groups. So you've absolutely lived that truth, and I appreciate that, and thank you for it. I also do want to call out the fact that with the departure of the supervisor, this is an all-male board or panel. Let's acknowledge that. It wasn't intended that way, but let's acknowledge that at least. Last words, Dike, a call to action. Would you make one?
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And I think that a few sort of thoughts in closing, but realistically, I think step one is getting engaged, right? The most important thing, and a lot of the folks who are paying attention to this, they're doing it in some way, shape, or form. So in some ways, I recognize this is the choir to who I'm preaching. But what I've always realized is that in San Diego in particular, being authentic, being transparent about your interests, being, I think, consistent, showing up is a really important and powerful thing. 80% of anything is, or what did it say? 80 or 20% of people show up and do all 80% of the work, whatever it is. But one thing I've definitely noticed is where there is activity, there's opportunity, right? Arnulfo just said, hey, be aware of these transitions of power, these transitions of status or roles, because you can absolutely find a space for yourself there, right? I filled a vacancy on my planning group, and not because I had ambitions of joining the planning group. There was a vacancy, and actually the first time I was asked, I said no because I didn't think that I had the knowledge or the skill set or the wherewithal to do it. And the second time I was asked, I happened to be standing next to our friend Sophie Wolfram, who used to work at Climate Action Campaign. And frankly, she said yes for me, right? I didn't say yes. She said yes for me, and I respect her. So I said, okay, well, if Sophie says so, then hey, I got to do this. And over time, though, I've come to realize is that, like I said, where there is activity, there's opportunity, right? And so be aware of when shifts and transitions, whether that's at elected office, boards, commissions, et cetera, where you have those pivot points, those transitions, there's all kinds of untold opportunity. And then ultimately, I think you need to be curious, right? You need to understand what it is that you're seeking to achieve in the grand scheme of things, and then basically just reverse engineer that. And so what I would like to call people on to do is to look around. I like to sort of live life local is my little mantra. My barbershop is 2 blocks away. My dentist is 2 blocks the other way. This last year or so of pandemic, I've been walking around, biking around a lot more than even I did before. And I would just like to, call on everyone to look around their local community, start small. You don't have big changes because, you just wake up one day and decide to quit smoking or whatever. That doesn't happen, right? Everything is progression, right? And so I would like to have folks just, try to do something small and then just continue in that vein, right? Use whatever skills, use whatever interests, use whatever ambition you have, and, get out there and be somebody.
Great. No, that's very real and very true. And I will speak from my own experience of thinking as a young gay boy that I had no place in public society, public life, that was cast out. And it took a long time to overcome that and to be comfortable with who I am, and to see that in other people. So to those of you who feel like you don't belong, that there isn't a place, there is. Step forward, and there will be people to help you make that space as well. So this is a community. So I like those calls to action. I will add from a practical sense, call Scott Peters, a representative. Tell him to keep housing in whatever, I'm not even going to get too specific about this, but whatever the hell he does in Washington, keep housing front and center. People are dying on the streets. Families are losing their homes. Call Scott Peters, call your representative, tell him it matters. Tell him in the next few days, if you possibly can. A comment from Eric at City Heights CDC about voting. The other call to action is, let us not get complacent. These are midterm elections coming up. We all have a role in helping our friends and neighbors get out to vote. So let's not forget to do that. With that, I have a few things I have to do to wrap up, but I want to thank our guests. Arnulfo Manriquez, the president and CEO of MAAC, and Dike Anyiwo, who is a man of all trades, advocate in the community. Yimby Dem, and thank you both for being here. To the supervisor for taking her time she was enthusiastic about being here today, even though it was hard to fit in her calendar. She wanted to be here because this issue matters to her, and she has seized really sees leadership there. Jeffrey Ewan is still on here. He put his contact information in the chat. Please talk to him. He is part of a data-driven, principled leadership team, and we want to make sure we stay in close touch with each other. So with that, I'm going to thank some folks. Thank you to our guests. Thank you to Union Bank for your title sponsorship. The conference wouldn't be possible without the support of all our sponsors from all parts of the affordable housing sector. I'd like to thank ConAm Management, PCL Construction for the holistic health sponsorship, bringing you both meditations and Starbucks all this week. I'd like to thank our keynote sponsors, Sun Country Builders, Chase Bank, San Diego Housing Commission, our track sponsors, Wells Fargo, San Diego Interfaith Housing, Bank of America, Merit Capital, and U.S. Bank. I'd also like to thank Affirmed Housing Group, Community Housing Works, Lument, and RSG Incorporated for their support of this year's conference. Thank you to all of our sponsors who made this year's conference a success, for us to remember, reimagine, and re-engage what it means in housing. We learned a lot this week, and if you're feeling the need to make an immediate impact, consider donating to the Give For Fund, the new initiative of the Jewish Community Foundation of San Diego. Give For is a fund of 12 nonprofits confronting homelessness in San Diego through prevention, intervention, and systems change. I think someone's going to put a link to Give For in the chat here. Our HEAL network is included in this fund, in the Give For Fund, as a systems change agent. And we heard multiple times this week, our sector needs lived experience involved in policy change and solutions to reduce homelessness. We will share the link in the chat. And let me not forget our amazing, amazing Housing Federation staff who've worked to make all of this production come together so well. It is all the result of teamwork, and every member of our team was involved. I'd like to give special shout out to our Chief Operating Officer, Carol Hazen, Director of Communications, Amanda Nelson, Events and Programs Coordinator, Brooklyn Del Priori, Special Programs Assistant, Imanol Tovar, and our Chief of Policy and Education, Laura Nunn, who was really responsible for recruiting a lot of the content of this conference. I have an amazing team. I'm blessed to be a part of this community and to have a team that is working together to make this kind of change. All of you here listening today are part of that, so thank you. My life is blessed because of you, and we will make change together. Thank you all, and we'll see you November 1st of next year in person for our next conference.
Thank
Be
you.
well.